An arrogant millionaire walks into a toy store to show off his spending power, but a photograph dropped by a poor child will lead him to discover a family secret that will change his life forever. Will it be too late to make amends for the past? Enrique Martinez strode into a toy store lit up with dazzling Christmas lights. The windows were filled with electric trains, dolls that seemed to come to life, and huge teddy bears adorned with red bows. It was Christmas Eve, and the store was packed with adults hurrying around in search of the perfect gifts. Enrique, a middle-aged man dressed in a smart black coat and cashmere scarf, sauntered in with an air of superiority. The employees rushed to serve him, noting his distinguished demeanor and, more important, his willingness to spend without restraint. Enrique scanned each shelf, selecting the most expensive toys for his nephews. "I want something that really impresses," he said, gesturing vaguely toward a bicycle decorated with flashing lights. As he examined the toys, something caught his eye. Near the entrance, a thin boy in worn-out clothes was staring in wonder at an electric train running along a small track. His eyes shone with a mixture of wonder and sadness, as if he knew the train would never be his. The boy, who looked no older than 9, wasn't touching anything. He was simply admiring it. Enrique frowned. The boy's presence, with his tattered clothes and worn-out shoes, seemed out of place in such luxurious surroundings. Irritated, he approached the boy with a frown. "What are you doing here?" he asked her, in a stern tone. The boy stepped back in surprise but didn't respond. Before he could say anything, Enrique pointed to the door. "This is no place for beggars. Get out." The boy lowered his gaze, muttering a shy, "I'm sorry," and hurried out of the store. A young employee, Clara, who had witnessed everything from behind the counter, quickly intervened. "Sir, he wasn't bothering anyone. He was just looking," she said, her voice soft but firm. Enrique turned to her, visibly upset. "I don't need to be lectured on charity. Do your job, young lady, and keep your nose out of things that don't concern you." Clara looked at him with a mixture of indignation and sadness, but said nothing more. She simply watched as the man returned to his tour of the store. Meanwhile, the image of the child going out into the cold night remained engraved in her mind. Enrique, apparently indifferent, continued selecting gifts. But something was bothering him, although he could not pinpoint what. Outside, the snow was beginning to fall, covering the streets with a white blanket that contrasted with the warm lights of the store. The laughter of the children resonated in the air, but the echo of that pitiful look continued to haunt Enrique. As Enrique stepped out of the store, laden with bags full of expensive gifts, the cold night air hit him like a slap in the face. Christmas lights decorated the streets, and snow crunched beneath his immaculately polished shoes. He paused for a moment, mentally checking his list to make sure he hadn't forgotten any gifts. As he walked to his car, something on the ground caught his eye, a small, worn photograph. Enrique cautiously bent down and picked it up. In the picture, a smiling, familiar-looking boy posed next to a humble-looking woman in front of a modest house. It was the same boy he had chased out of the store moments before. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, was a name, Lucas. Beneath it, a number and an address were carefully written. Enrique studied the photograph for a few seconds, feeling a slight discomfort that he could not explain. Something about the expression of the boy in the photo, with his eyes filled with radiant innocence, disturbed him. "She must have dropped it on the way out," he muttered to himself, putting the photo in the inside pocket of his coat. Despite his natural inclination to ignore outside matters, Enrique couldn't get the image of Lucas out of his mind. There was something deeply unsettling about the idea of such a young boy being out on the street on Christmas Eve. But true to his character, he tried hard to rationalize his uneasiness. "It's not my problem," he said out loud, as if by verbalizing it, he could convince himself. Arriving home, a luxurious mansion decorated with ostentatious Christmas decorations, Enrique sat at his desk to check his correspondence. But instead of concentrating, he took the photo out of his pocket and placed it on the table. He stared at it for several minutes, unable to look away. The details of the image seemed to come to life before him. The boy's patched shirt, the woman's smile that, despite everything, radiated a maternal warmth, and the house in the background, which was barely standing. Enrique frowned, annoyed with himself for allowing himself to be distracted by something so trivial. However, curiosity was beginning to gain ground. Why would anyone carry around a photo like this? He thought out loud. The man turned off the light in his office, determined not to think about the matter anymore. But that night, as he tried to sleep, the image of Lucas kept invading his thoughts. The look on the boy's face in the shop and the smile in the photograph intertwined in his mind, forming a feeling that Henrique did not remember having experienced in a long time: guilt. Finally, almost impulsively, he turned on the light and took out the photo again. He looked at the address written on the back. For a moment, he considered ignoring it and throwing the photo away. But something stronger stopped him. He put the photo away on his bedside table, promising himself that he would make a decision about what to do next morning. The next morning, Henrique woke up earlier than usual. The photograph of Lucas was still on the bedside table, a silent witness to his restless thoughts. He got up, took the photo, and sat by the window, gazing at the softly falling snow. As he studied the image once more, his mind dragged him to a corner of the past that he had tried to bury for years. As a child, Henrique lived in a poor neighborhood with his family. His mother used to say that the most valuable things in life could not be bought, a lesson that he had decided to ignore as soon as he had the chance. His younger brother Gabriel was always his opposite: optimistic, kind, and a dreamer. Gabriel was the one who sought adventures in the most ordinary places, while Henrique only thought about how to get out of there. The bond between the two brothers had been strong in childhood, but over the years it had weakened. Henrique focused on his career and accumulating wealth, leaving Gabriel behind. The last time they spoke, Gabriel had tried to convince him to attend a family gathering. Henrique, as always, had declined the invitation with a cold and distant excuse. A shiver ran down his spine as he remembered that day. Shortly afterward, Gabriel disappeared. No one knew exactly what had happened to him, only that he had left a huge void in the family. Henrique, unable to face the pain or the guilt, took refuge in his work and in building his personal empire. Now holding Lucas's photograph, he couldn't help but notice a disturbing resemblance to Gabriel. The boy's smile, his posture, even the expression in his eyes evoked echoes of his brother. Henrique shook his head, trying to rid himself of the thoughts that tormented him. He stood up and walked to his desk, where he kept a small box of memories from his childhood. It was a box he rarely opened, but at that moment he felt an inexplicable need to do so. Inside, he found old photos, letters, and a broken watch that had belonged to Gabriel. Everything was steeped in a past he had avoided confronting for years. "How did we get to this point, Gabriel?" he murmured, looking at his watch with melancholy. Emotions overwhelmed him, but at the same time, they awakened something that had lain dormant for decades: the desire to connect with what he had lost. The address written on Lucas's photograph now seemed more than just a detail. It was a door to answers he didn't even know he was looking for. With a deep sigh, Henrique made a decision. He would go to the place indicated in the photo. Although he did not know what he would find, it was clear that he could no longer ignore the shadows of his past. The direction of the photograph took Henrique to a part of the city he had not visited in decades. As he drove his luxury car through the narrow, run-down streets, he couldn't help but feel out of place. The buildings were old and worn, with facades that seemed to tell stories of better times. Finally, he stopped in front of a small house of cracked bricks, topped with a patched roof and a neglected garden. He took a deep breath before getting out of the car, holding the photograph in his hand. He walked to the door, feeling a knot in his stomach that he couldn't explain. He knocked gently, and after a few seconds, an older woman opened the door. Her gray hair was pulled back into a simple bun, and her eyes, tired but attentive, studied him warily. "Can I help you?" he asked in a sharp tone. Henrique lifted the photograph, showing it to her. "I'm Henrique Martins. I found this photo last night. It belongs to a boy named Lucas." The woman's face changed instantly. Although she tried to hide it, a flash of surprise and caution crossed her eyes. "What do you want with Lucas?" she asked, pushing the door shut as if she wanted to protect someone. "I just want to give this back to you." "Nothing more," Henrique replied, trying hard to sound sincere. After a moment of hesitation, the woman opened the door a little further and invited him in. The room was small and sparsely decorated, but clean and tidy. In one corner, a humble but carefully decorated Christmas tree contrasted with the austerity of the place. Lucas appeared shortly after, holding an old book in his hands. His eyes widened at the sight of Henrique, and he instinctively stepped back. "It's you," he murmured with a mixture of surprise and fear. Henrique crouched down a little to be at her height and showed her the photo. "You dropped this in the store last night. I thought you might want to get it back." The boy looked at the photograph in disbelief and then reached out to take it. "Thank you," he said in a low voice, avoiding eye contact. Donna Celia, who was obviously Lucas's grandmother, watched him intently. Finally, she broke the awkward silence. "Why does this matter to a man like you?" he asked, his tone still distrustful. Henrique hesitated before answering. He wasn't sure how to express what had brought him here. "I don't know exactly. Maybe it was an impulse. But I think there's something I need to understand." Donna Celia crossed her arms, assessing him carefully. "If you're here to make us feel sorry for you or to satisfy your conscience, we don't need you. We've been through enough already." Henrique was about to answer, but at that moment something in Lucas's gaze stopped him. It wasn't just fear or distrust, but something deeper, a loneliness that hit him like a distant memory. Before he could say anything else, Donna Celia sighed, and although her posture remained cautious, she pointed to a chair. "I suppose you can stay a while, but if this is some kind of game, I warn you that we are not as naive as we seem." Henrique nodded and sat down, feeling that the conversation he was about to have could change more than just his own life. Henrique watched Donna Celia, who remained silent for long moments, as if she were considering whether she should trust him. Lucas, sitting in a small chair next to the Christmas tree, nervously played with the edges of the photograph while looking to his grandmother for guidance. Finally, Donna Celia broke the silence. "You said your name was Enrique Martins, right?" he asked with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Henrique nodded. "Yeah." The woman stared at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Finally, she sighed, as if a heavy truth was about to be revealed. "Lucas is my grandson, and his last name is also Martins." Henrique frowned, confused, but did not interrupt. Donna Celia continued. "He is the son of Gabriel, his brother." The revelation hit Enrique like a bolt of lightning. He was speechless, unable to process what he had just heard. The woman looked at him with an expression that was a mixture of resentment and pain. "Gabriel never spoke to us about you, at least not with affection," he added, his tone sharp as a razor. Henrique looked away, feeling a growing weight on his chest. His mind drifted back to the days when he had grown increasingly distant from his family, convinced that material success was all that mattered. He hadn't thought about how his decisions affected others, especially Gabriel. What happened to him?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Donna Celia sat down, and for the first time her rigid posture seemed to relax. "Gabriel died 8 years ago. A car accident. It was sudden and devastating. I stayed with Lucas. He was only 1 year old when we lost his father." Henrique closed his eyes, trying to contain the emotions that threatened to overflow. Not only had he lost his brother, but he had never had the chance to reconcile with him. "I didn't know. I had no idea," he murmured, feeling small and guilty. "Of course I didn't know," Donna Celia replied bitterly. Then she paused, as if reconsidering her words. She sighed deeply before continuing. "Gabriel always wanted to contact you. He said that despite everything, you were his brother. But you were too busy with your life of luxury to look back." Henrique felt each word hit him like a hammer, yet there was no resentment in her response, only a painful recognition of the truth. "You're right," she admitted. "I abandoned him. I abandoned my family." The silence that followed was heavy, but instead of condemning him, Donna Celia seemed to soften. "Look, Mr. Martins, I hold no grudge against you, but if you're here looking to redeem the past, it won't be easy. Lucas doesn't need charity. He needs something real." Henrique looked at the boy, who was watching him with curiosity, but also with an invisible barrier that was difficult to break through. At that moment, he knew that this was not a passing visit. It was the beginning of something bigger. Henrique left the house with a heavy heart and a feeling of emptiness he couldn't remember feeling in years. As he drove back to his mansion, Donna Celia's words echoed in his mind. "Lucas doesn't need charity. He needs something real. That phrase, so simple but loaded with meaning, confronted him with an uncomfortable truth. He couldn't buy forgiveness or fill the void he had left in his family with money. The next day, Enrique decided to return home. This time he didn't bring any gifts or empty promises, just a genuine intention to try to repair some of the damage. When he knocked on the door, Dona Celia greeted him with a surprised but no less cautious expression. "Here again?" he asked, crossing his arms in front of his chest. "I want to talk to Lucas," Enrique replied, trying to sound firm, although his voice betrayed a certain vulnerability. Dona Celia looked at him for a moment before stepping back and letting him in. Lucas was sitting on the living room floor, playing with an old toy truck that had clearly seen better days. Seeing Enrique, she looked up but didn't say anything. "Hi, Lucas," said Enrique, leaning down a little to be at his level. "Can I sit with you?" The boy nodded shyly, and Enrique settled down on the ground next to him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Enrique watched as Lucas pushed the truck with slow, careful movements. Finally, he broke the silence. "That truck looks special. Did someone give it to you?" Lucas nodded. "It was my dad's. My grandmother says he played with this when he was little." Enrique felt a lump in his throat. The connection between Lucas and Gabriel was palpable, and every little detail seemed to bring him closer to his brother's memories. "Your dad and I were brothers. When we were kids, we also played together. But I don't think I ever told you about that." Lucas looked at him, intrigued but still wary. Enrique continued, his voice soft but sincere. "I wasn't a good brother to your dad. I walked away from him and from our family, and for that, I want to ask for your forgiveness. I can't change what I did, but I want you to know that I'm here now." The boy didn't answer right away. He simply looked at him with those large, deep eyes that seemed to contain more wisdom than one would expect from someone so young. Before Lucas could say anything, the door opened and Clara entered with a bag in her hands. The young store employee had stopped by the house to deliver a small gift she had bought for Lucas after the incident. Seeing Enrique there, she was surprised. "Mr. Martins, what are you doing here?" Enrique stood up quickly, somewhat embarrassed. "I'm trying to make amends." Clara smiled, visibly impressed by the sincerity in his tone. Then she turned to Lucas and handed him the gift, a small electric train. "This is for you, Lucas. I hope you like it." Lucas carefully opened the package, his eyes shining at the sight of the train. He looked at Clara and then at Enrique. And although he didn't say anything, something in his expression seemed to soften. That night, as Enrique was saying goodbye, Clara stopped him before he got into his car. "If you really want to gain Lucas's trust, it won't be with expensive gifts or grand gestures. He needs to know that he can count on you, not just at Christmas, but always." Enrique nodded, his words resonating strongly. He understood that rebuilding those broken ties would be a long road, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to try. Enrique spent the next day reflecting on Clara's words. He knew that he couldn't fix the past overnight, but he also understood that if he wanted to prove to Lucas that he could count on him, he would have to take a significant step. That's when he had an idea: organize a special Christmas dinner for Lucas and Dona Celia. At first, he wasn't sure how to begin. Although he had the money and resources to hire someone to do everything for him, this time he decided to get personally involved. He called Clara for help, knowing that her honest advice would be invaluable. "A Christmas dinner?" Clara asked, surprised when Enrique explained his plan. "I want it to be special, something that shows I really care, but I don't want it to feel superficial or forced." Clara looked at him for a moment, assessing his sincerity, and then smiled. "Okay, I'll help you, but you'll have to get your hands dirty." That same afternoon, the two began planning. Enrique insisted on decorating Dona Celia's house, but Clara reminded him that what was important was not the luxury, but the detail. Together, they bought simple but cozy Christmas decorations, garlands, twinkling lights, and a new star for the Christmas tree. In the kitchen of Enrique's mansion, the two began to prepare the menu. Although the man was used to leaving such tasks to his employees, this time he rolled up his sleeves and made an effort to learn. Clara taught him how to make a stuffed turkey, homemade cakes, and Christmas cookies. Between laughter at his clumsy attempts and practical advice from Clara, Enrique began to discover the pleasure of working for something more than just his own benefit. "I can't believe you're making this yourself," Clara joked as she watched Henrique struggle with a pastry bag to decorate the cookies. "I can't believe it either," he replied, laughing, although with a spark of pride in his voice. When night came, the two of them loaded everything into Henrique's car and headed to Dona Celia's house. The woman was initially reluctant to accept so much attention, but Clara convinced her to do so, explaining that it had all been Henrique's idea. Lucas watched the preparations with a mixture of wonder and caution. Although he didn't say much, you could see that something inside him was beginning to change. When Henrique placed the new star on the tree, the boy approached and looked at it silently before smiling shyly. The house, which had previously seemed gloomy and worn, now glowed with the warmth of Christmas lights and the aroma of freshly cooked food. Henrique looked at the result with a satisfaction he couldn't remember feeling in a long time. This wasn't a sign of his wealth, but of his effort and dedication. That night, as they were finishing off the last details, Clara approached him and whispered, "You did something great today, but remember, this is just the beginning." Henrique nodded, knowing she was right. As he watched Lucas helping his grandmother place the plates on the table, he felt like, for the first time in a long time, he was in the right place. The table was carefully set, decorated with a simple tablecloth, but adorned with small details that spoke of affection: candles, pine branches, and paper figures that Lucas had made with his grandmother. The aroma of stuffed turkey filled the small house, mixing with the warm glow of the Christmas lights. Lucas, sitting next to his grandmother, watched in silence as Henrique, visibly nervous, finished serving the last dishes. When everyone was seated, there was a moment of awkward silence. Henrique cleared his throat, aware that there was something important to say before they could enjoy dinner. He looked at Lucas and then at Dona Celia, searching for the right words. "I want to thank you for allowing me to be here tonight," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I can't help but think of everything I lost because of my decisions in the past. This Christmas has made me realize how much time I wasted walking away from the people who really mattered." Lucas looked at him intently, his small face reflecting a mixture of curiosity and caution. Henrique continued, "I know I can't change what I did. I know I wasn't there when you needed me. But I want to promise you one thing. From today on, I will do everything I can to be a part of your lives." There was a moment of silence after his words, broken only by the soft flickering of the Christmas tree lights. Dona Celia watched Henrique with an expression that was difficult to read. But it was Lucas who spoke first. "Why now?" the boy asked, his voice soft but full of honesty. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Henrique leaned towards him, wanting the boy to understand the sincerity behind his words. "Because I was selfish, Lucas. I thought that success and money were more important than my family. I was wrong. I don't have an excuse, just a promise. I won't make that mistake again." Lucas looked down, playing with the edges of his napkin. For a moment, Henrique feared the boy would reject him entirely. But then Dona Celia intervened, placing a gentle hand on her grandson's shoulder. "Sometimes people need time to understand what really matters," she said, looking at Henrique with a softer expression than before. "It may be hard to trust again, but everyone deserves a second chance." Lucas looked up at his grandmother and then at Henrique. Although he still looked unsure, he nodded slightly. "Okay, but you have to keep your promise." Henrique felt a lump in his throat, but also a wave of relief. "I will, I promise." The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, and the conversation became more relaxed as they shared dinner. Henrique spoke of memories of Gabriel, stories that made Lucas laugh and filled the air with a warm nostalgia. Clara, who had insisted on staying to help, watched everything from a corner with a satisfied smile. That night, as they said goodbye, Henrique stopped by the Christmas tree with Lucas. He pulled a small package out of his pocket and handed it to the boy. "This was your dad's," he said with a sad smile. Lucas carefully opened the package and found an antique watch, the same one Henrique had kept for years. The boy held it in his hands, looking at the object with reverence. "Thank you," he said in a low voice. Henrique felt that, for the first time, he had taken a real step toward reconnecting with his family. Christmas morning arrived with a clear sky and the characteristic cold of December. The sun's rays reflected off the snow that covered the streets, making everything seem to sparkle. In Dona Celia's small house, the atmosphere was warm and full of a different energy, something Henrique had not felt in years. Lucas woke up early, like any excited child at Christmas. When he entered the living room, he found his grandmother decorating the table with cups of hot chocolate and small cookies she had baked the night before. Henrique was already there, sitting by the tree, watching the scene with a smile. "Merry Christmas, Lucas," said Henrique, standing up when he saw him enter. The boy returned a shy "Merry Christmas" and sat down next to him, still holding the watch he had given him the night before. Henrique looked at it tenderly, noticing how Lucas carried it carefully, as if it were a priceless treasure. "That watch belonged to your dad," Henrique said, breaking the silence. "I kept it because it was one of the few things that reminded me of who he was and who we used to be together." Lucas looked at him curiously, as if he expected to hear more. Henrique continued, "Gabriel was an amazing man. He always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. I think that's why he was so insistent on trying to contact me. He wanted me to be part of the family again." The boy nodded, processing his uncle's words. Then with a small smile, he asked, "What was it like when you were a child?" Henrique laughed softly. "He was a dreamer. He always had crazy ideas. He once built a rocket out of cardboard boxes and convinced me that we would go to the moon. Of course, it never worked, but we had so much fun that I never forgot that day." Lucas's laughter filled the room, and for a moment, Henrique felt like he had made a real connection. Later, Clara arrived at the house carrying a Christmas cake and some modest gifts she had brought for the family. The young woman seemed to fit perfectly into the environment, helping Dona Celia in the kitchen and joking with Lucas. Henrique watched her with gratitude, knowing that without her, he probably would never have reached this moment. After breakfast, Henrique walked over to Lucas and handed him one last present. It was a large box, wrapped in blue paper and a gold bow. Lucas carefully opened it, revealing a brand new electric train, complete with a track that could be put together in different configurations. "I know how much you love trains," Henrique said with a smile. "But this isn't just a gift. I want us to build it together." Lucas nodded excitedly, and the two began to work on assembling it. As the pieces fell into place and the train came to life, the house was filled with laughter and the sound of metal wheels turning on the rails. Dona Celia, watching from the kitchen, smiled to herself. Although she knew there was still a long way to go for Henrique to fully gain Lucas's trust, she could see that he was on the right path. That afternoon, when Henrique said goodbye, it was with a heartfelt hug from Lucas and a warm thank you from Dona Celia. As he walked away, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. He had recovered something priceless, something that money could never buy. The morning after Christmas came with a special clarity. Henrique sat in his office, staring at the photograph of Lucas and Gabriel that he had now placed on his desk. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose beyond material success. Inspired by the renewed connection with his family, Henrique began working on something that had been on his mind since the day before. He picked up the phone and made several calls, calling his team together for an urgent meeting. It wasn't often that he worked during the holidays, but this time it wasn't business as usual. Hours later, Henrique went back to Dona Celia's house, with Lucas waiting impatiently by the window. Upon entering, Henrique was greeted with warm hugs. This time, he carried with him news that would change not only their lives, but also that of many other people. "I have something important to tell you," Henrique announced, gathering everyone in the small room. "I have decided to create a foundation in honor of my brother Gabriel and you, Lucas." Dona Celia looked at him in surprise, while Lucas approached, curious. Henrique continued, his voice full of emotion. "It will be a foundation dedicated to helping children who, like you, deserve opportunities and a better future. I want it to bear Gabriel's name because his generous spirit always sought to give to others." Lucas smiled widely but still looked in disbelief. "Really, Uncle Henrique?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Henrique nodded and put a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, but I want this to be something we do together. I want you to help me understand how we can better help other children. This foundation won't just be mine, it will be ours." Dona Celia, visibly moved, stood up and took Henrique's hands. "Gabriel would be proud of you, Henrique. This is what he always wanted, to unite the family and do something meaningful. That afternoon, Henrique, Lucas, Dona Celia, and Clara celebrated together not only Christmas, but also the beginning of a new chapter. There was something different in the air, a sense of hope that filled every corner of the small house. In the days that followed, Henrique devoted every free moment to planning the foundation. Lucas, excited to be part of something so big, accompanied his uncle to the meetings, learning and offering ideas with the curiosity and creativity of a child. Clara also joined the project, contributing her experience and enthusiasm. Over time, the foundation became a symbol of Henrique's transformation. From a cold man focused solely on success, he became someone who valued human connection above all else. Although he was still working to gain Lucas's full trust, he knew that every little gesture counted. The following Christmas, the foundation opened its first community center, and Henrique brought Lucas to the inaugural event. Standing next to the memorial plaque bearing Gabriel's name, Henrique felt a deep inner peace. He had found something that money could never buy: purpose, love, and family. Lucas's laughter filled the room, and for a moment, Henrique felt like he had made a real connection. Later, Clara arrived at the house carrying a Christmas cake and some modest gifts she had brought for the family. The young woman seemed to fit perfectly into the environment, helping Dona Celia in the kitchen and joking with Lucas. Henrique watched her with gratitude, knowing that without her, he probably would never have reached this moment. After breakfast, Henrique walked over to Lucas and handed him one last present. It was a large box, wrapped in blue paper and a gold bow. Lucas carefully opened it, revealing a brand new electric train, complete with a track that could be put together in different configurations. "I know how much you love trains," Henrique said with a smile. "But this isn't just a gift. I want us to build it together." Lucas nodded excitedly, and the two began to work on assembling it. As the pieces fell into place and the train came to life, the house was filled with laughter and the sound of metal wheels turning on the rails. Dona Celia, watching from the kitchen, smiled to herself. Although she knew there was still a long way to go for Henrique to fully gain Lucas's trust, she could see that he was on the right path. That afternoon, when Henrique said goodbye, it was with a heartfelt hug from Lucas and a warm thank you from Dona Celia. As he walked away, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. He had recovered something priceless, something that money could never buy. The morning after Christmas came with a special clarity. Henrique sat in his office, staring at the photograph of Lucas and Gabriel that he had now placed on his desk. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose beyond material success. Inspired by the renewed connection with his family, Henrique began working on something that had been on his mind since the day before. He picked up the phone and made several calls, calling his team together for an urgent meeting. It wasn't often that he worked during the holidays, but this time it wasn't business as usual. Hours later, Henrique went back to Dona Celia's house, with Lucas waiting impatiently by the window. Upon entering, Henrique was greeted with warm hugs. This time, he carried with him news that would change not only their lives, but also that of many other people. "I have something important to tell you," Henrique announced, gathering everyone in the small room. "I have decided to create a foundation in honor of my brother Gabriel and you, Lucas." Dona Celia looked at him in surprise, while Lucas approached, curious. Henrique continued, his voice full of emotion. "It will be a foundation dedicated to helping children who, like you, deserve opportunities and a better future. I want it to bear Gabriel's name because his generous spirit always sought to give to others." Lucas smiled widely but still looked in disbelief. "Really, Uncle Henrique?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Henrique nodded and put a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, but I want this to be something we do together. I want you to help me understand how we can better help other children. This foundation won't just be mine, it will be ours." Dona Celia, visibly moved, stood up and took Henrique's hands. "Gabriel would be proud of you, Henrique. This is what he always wanted, to unite the family and do something meaningful." That afternoon, Henrique, Lucas, Dona Celia, and Clara celebrated together not only Christmas, but also the beginning of a new chapter. There was something different in the air, a sense of hope that filled every corner of the small house. In the days that followed, Henrique devoted every free moment to planning the foundation. Lucas, excited to be part of something so big, accompanied his uncle to the meetings, learning and offering ideas with the curiosity and creativity of a child. Clara also joined the project, contributing her experience and enthusiasm. Over time, the foundation became a symbol of Henrique's transformation. From a cold man focused solely on success, he became someone who valued human connection above all else. Although he was still working to gain Lucas's full trust, he knew that every little gesture counted. The following Christmas, the foundation opened its first community center, and Henrique brought Lucas to the inaugural event. Standing next to the memorial plaque bearing Gabriel's name, Henrique felt a deep inner peace. He had found something that money could never buy: purpose, love, and family. Lucas, holding his uncle's hand, looked at him with a smile. "Uncle Henrique, Dad would be happy." Henrique nodded, his eyes shining. "I know, Lucas, and so am I." At that moment, under a sky full of stars, Henrique realized that he had found the true meaning of Christmas: giving without expecting anything in return, and loving unconditionally. Henrique's story teaches us that it is never too late to acknowledge our mistakes and take the step toward forgiveness and reconnection. What would you have done in his place? Would you have ignored that photograph on the ground? Or would you have had the courage to face your past? Sometimes true wealth is not in what we possess, but in the bonds we build with those around us. Click on the video on the screen to continue this inspiring journey of self-discovery and reflect on what really matters in life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this that will motivate you to see the world with different eyes. See you in the next video.